And I am live. Waiting for a few people to come inside. Today we're going to be doing Saturn in the 5th house, as it says in the title. I hope this is a fun stream, and no, I'm not expecting any cuts today, so you guys don't have to worry about that this time. Hi, Diana. Alright, maybe I'll just get started as I'm waiting for a few people to come inside. Hi, Talia444. I'm not sure if it's the same Talia that I talked to, but hi, Talia. Hello, Miguel. I also hope this stream doesn't go down. Hello, Nas6495. Alright then, let us get started. Now, I hope you guys don't think that the things I'm going to be saying are going to be too negative, although I do think that there are a lot of not too very nice things I have to say about this placement. Well, hopefully you guys can bear with me. So, Saturn in the 5th house. So, beginning. Now, the 5th house is often called the house of intelligence, but a better name is the house of genius. Because this is a house of our own unique insights, our own unique ideas. The 2nd house is where we receive knowledge. The 3rd house is where we process and analyze what we have received. Excuse me. The 4th is a house of meditation and contemplation. And finally, the 5th is where we display our unique understanding of a given subject and then contribute meaningfully into a field. But Saturn, which is a planet that negates the significations of whatever house it sits in, suggests here that the individual may lack originality. You may feel like a very common and ordinary person, and you may resent this about yourself. You may dream of being seen as special, being admired, and being recognized, and it may hurt you to be made to feel like you don't have anything to contribute. Let me read a little bit more. Alternatively, you may be someone who doesn't care about attention and recognition or fame, and you find such things superficial. You may instead be interested in more serious pursuits. Instead of being known as the idea guy or the idea girl, you may be the one who wishes to execute plans and execute other people's plans. You may be seen as a trusted project manager or CEO or other executive of sorts. Saturn is a planet of architecture as it is concerned with laying proper foundations and developing solid structures. And so, someone with Saturn in the 5th house is very good at actually bringing ideas into the material world, bringing them to fruition. Though it may not excel in producing the seed of ideas, Saturn as the god of agriculture is good for making the seed grow. So, let us elaborate a little bit further. The 5th house is the house of ideas, the house of our own unique ideas, the house of our own unique insights. You know what I mean? It is not the house of knowledge, for example, which is the 2nd. Here, after having read a lot of books, after having listened to a lot of people speak, you come up with your own insights. That's what the 5th house does. But if you have Saturn here, you may struggle to do that. You may struggle to come up with your own unique insights into things. It may be difficult for you. You may be somebody who spends a lot of time, because Saturn is also the planet of repetition. You may be the type of person to repeat other people's ideas. You may like to repeat quotes. You may like to gather quotes and repeat them. You may like to gather Bible verses and repeat them. You're very, very good at repeating other people's ideas. But you're not very, very good at coming up with your own, at least initially, because remember, Saturn is a planet that flips. Saturn is a planet that grows into its opposite. So in the beginning of life, this is more or less how you may be. Especially if Saturn is badly placed. Yes. But through efforts, as you get older and as you repeat people's ideas a lot, you end up extracting very, 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 very deep insights, because Saturn is a planet that also goes deep. But yes, let me go into the chat to see anything new. No love when you are real. I'm not sure what that is supposed to mean. All right, we have 8 people that are viewing, though I see very few people in the chats over here. Anyway, let us continue. So, the fifth house is also the house of play, but one could be perceived as rather boring because Saturn here can remove one's charm and make one rather bland conversationally. One could struggle in social settings like parties, for example, as one could struggle with being humorous, spontaneous, and conversationally playful. Oftentimes, those with such a Saturn can go one of two directions. Either remain socially awkward and continue to be perceived as uninteresting, or they dedicate themselves in learning the art of charisma to make themselves humorous, playful, and overall interesting. For the Saturn in the fifth native that does indeed go the route of dedicating themselves in learning charisma, they may decide to watch videos about how to be funny or tell jokes, read books about how to have a conversation that is both playful and yet deep, and how to be flirtatious in an unserious way. But for the native with displacement who does not take seriously the development of his own charisma, he may find himself lonely, friendless, and struggling to find a partner. Now, see, there is this idea of Saturn that Saturn necessarily grows better with time. This is not exactly true. Saturn grows better over time with efforts. Because always keep in mind, there's so many people in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s that struggle with the same flaws that they've been struggling with since they were in their 20s. You know what I mean? What else to say about this paragraph that we just read? You know something? Saturn is a planet that relates to defeats. And Saturn is, technically speaking, the planet of ignorance. It is a planet of ignorance, but that grows into knowledge and grows into understanding. And this is why it's also related to science in the scientific field. Because a scientist does not know of the thing that it's trying to study. It is deeply ignorant, completely ignorant of the thing that it's trying to study. But through experimentation, through practice, through a lot of frustration in testing and experimenting, it develops more and more understanding. Jupiter is different. Jupiter is not a planet of science because Jupiter is the planet of knowledge that is already given to you. It is an enlightened knowledge that is already given to you, which is why it relates so much to religion and spirituality. Because one of the ideas behind religion is that they already know things. You know what I mean? Once upon a time, a long time ago, somebody was enlightened, and so they already know things, and they simply give you that knowledge without you yourself having to properly experiment to arrive at that knowledge. Do you understand what I mean? Let me check the chat to see if there are any questions or any comments or anything like that. Oh, you're saying that you love it when I keep it real. Thank you, Talia. Sorry, I can't. That is a very specific question. I can't answer a specific question like that right now. The only thing that I can tell you is that if you have a Capricorn ascendant and you have Saturn in Taurus, which is the fifth house, Saturn is well placed in Taurus. Sure, it'll give you a little bit of a hard time when you're younger, but it will make itself very malleable and very easy to work with. And also, if you have this placement in Ardra, that is another good placement because Saturn likes Mercury, though Mercury is neutral to Saturn. And so it suggests that, yes, it may give you a little bit of a hard time with these significations, but with time, it gets better. Hi, Blessed. How are you? Always nice to see you in my streams. Well, listen, personally speaking, I don't really see how Saturn in the fifth house adds to one's discipline. That is more of a Saturn in the first, third, sixth type of thing. So let us go further with this. Saturn trying to make a science out of charisma. The fifth house is a house of charisma. The fifth house is a house of charisma, and Saturn is trying to make a science out of charisma. And so let us see, for example, there is that popular channel, Charisma on Command. I do not know this person's chart. Actually, I know his chart a little bit, but he does not have an ascendant. This channel, for example, is a good example of the sort of interest that somebody with Saturn in the fifth would have, you know, trying to make a science out of charisma, trying to really deeply understand the nature of charisma, the nature of how to be playful, the nature of how to be interesting, things like that. Yeah, this is definitely a placement 4. Also, something else is that many of the Chala nakshatras exist within Saturn's signs, and many of the Chala nakshatras are also interested in making a science out of charisma. Especially Shravana, Shatabisha, and Dhanishta. They are all deeply interested in how to be cool and how to make a science out of charisma. They're very much interested in that kind of stuff. Is this write-up applicable for transits as well? Um, I think some parts may be applicable to transits. Some parts may be applicable to transits. No, yeah, it can work for transits as well. But you want to know something, Miguel? If Saturn is transiting your fifth house, you may lose your partner. You may lose your partner. Your partner may be stolen from you. Things like that. Yes, because if you have Saturn in the fifth, we'll read about that much later. It can mean that your partner could be stolen from you. Because Saturn carries a lot of Jyeshta's energy, and wherever there's Jyeshta energy, you're susceptible to losing that stuff, that thing, by having somebody steal it from you. Okay. Hi, Galactic Blueprint. Do you have Saturn in the fifth? I see you wrote here. Also, I am obsessed with topics like charisma. I study people like Marilyn, Diana. Also, I'm a Dhanishta Lagna Capricorn. Yes, like I said before, Shravana, Dhanishta, and Shatabisha, they also have a lot of this where they want to study the science of charisma. All right, then, let's go back. Where were we? Okay, let's go down. So now, on the subject of finding a partner and romantic relationships in general, Saturn in the fifth is one of those positions that can make it so the individual takes longer than usual to get into a relationship, even the first relationship. So sex appeal is also a form of charisma. Sex appeal is a form of charisma. And so this also applies to the fifth house. Even though the fifth house is not specifically related to gender, even though the fifth house is not specifically related to gender performance, because it is a house of sex appeal and also related to romantic conquest, it is indirectly related to gender performance because the performance of masculinity can help one to attract a female partner, and likewise, the performance of femininity can also help one to attract a male partner. So a strong fifth house can make a man rather macho, for example. However, Saturn here could once again remove one's ability to perform one's gender in a way that is romantically persuasive. So if you have Saturn in the fifth house, it can make it harder for a man to really communicate his masculinity in a way that is sexy for a woman. If a woman has Saturn in the fifth house, it can be hard for her to communicate her femininity in a way that is sexy for a man. Do you see? Whereas someone who has Venus in the fifth, for example, let's say it's a man that has Venus in the fifth, he may puff up his chest. You know what I mean? He may make himself larger, puff up his chest, walk in a way that is rather seductive, because he understands, the Venus in the fifth house person understands that this is part of what makes a man seductive to a woman. His masculinity, just the nature of his masculinity. But someone who has Saturn here may not have that intuition of how to do that. They may not have that intuition. So yes, the fifth house is also indirectly and yet still strongly related to gender performance. So once again, as a response to this, the natives with these placements could go one of two directions. They may either remain without charm and be seen as romantically invisible. Okay, so they either may remain without charm and remain romantically invisible, or they may learn the basics of how to be charming. They may once again make a science out of charm. What is the nature of charm? What is the nature of sex appeal? They may try to investigate that matter as scientifically as they can, watch a lot of videos on that, read a lot of books of that, etc., etc., etc. So these natives may watch a lot of videos about dating and how to cultivate the sort of personality that is successful in the dating market. Saturn is the planet of ignorance, and so it simply does not understand much about the house it sits in, and so it looks for a guy so it can help develop itself in tangible ways. So the guy can also provide tangible experiences. There is this idea that Saturn has no guru, since it is a planet of experience and experimentation. Let me write that. Experience and experimentation. You're experimenting because you're very ignorant about it. But this isn't necessarily the case. Saturn may search for a long time to find a teacher that can finally help them with a particular subject. This is different from Jupiter, for example, who, from a young age, could have multiple teachers. And so, this Saturn could watch many videos related to dating. So you see, like, red pill stuff, black pill stuff. The Wizard Liz. The Wizard Liz is another one. Let me type her here. The Wizard Liz is another one. Although I understand that these people are generally seen as toxic. The Wizard Liz is seen as toxic. These people, red pill people, are seen as toxic. Listen, these are the examples that the internet has given us. But there's another less toxic person. Or rather, a person that is less seen as toxic. His name is Matthew Hussey, right? Matthew Hussey. He's another person who makes a science out of dating, a science out of being charming, a science out of trying to, attract a partner. Does he have a birth chart available on the internet? Matthew Hussey. His name is actually kind of funny to me. Matthew Hussey. He has no birth time, unfortunately. And his birth chart, I don't think it's available on AstroSeek. Yeah. His moon is either in... I do believe this is his birth chart, isn't it? Matthew Hussey from England. Let's read here. Is a British dating coach. Yes. YouTuber, personality, and writer. Yes, he is a British dating coach. So it must be him. Between Uttarabhadrapada and Revati... Listen, we don't have a birth time, but I would not be surprised if he were a Revati. Because Revatis are also very much interested in how to be charming, how to be seductive, dating. Mrigashiras are also very much interested in how to become more masculine, how to attract women. Yeah. But in any case, yes, somebody who has Saturn in the 5th would very much also be interested in these topics. They'd be interested in the science of how to be charming, in the science of how to attract a partner, in the science of how to be seductive, in the science of, yes, all these things that relate to romantic conquest. Now let me come over here to some of the comments and see what you guys have to say. Okay, so Galactic Blueprint confirms I have Saturn in the 5th, and yes, I'm very shy in new convos with people, but I am funny and spontaneous with people I am comfortable with. Also, Saturn in the 5th, true about sexual display. I struggle trying... Oh, you're trying the mantra Kleem. Oh, do you guys know of the mantra Kleem and the deity that relates to the mantra Kleem? Okay, so the mantra Kleem. Let me open up Notepad over here. So the Kleem mantra is basically the mantra of attraction. It is the mantra of Lord Krishna. Let me write it here. It is the mantra of Lord Kamadeva. Let me write it here. And it's the mantra of the goddess Lalita. Right? Krishna, Kamadeva, Lalita. What does it mean for a single mantra to be related to all these deities? It basically means that the mantra gives rise to these deities in different contexts. Always remember that the true form of a deity is the mantra, not the external forms, which means that deep down, at their roots, Krishna, Lalita, and Kamadeva, they are all the same thing. They are all the same energy because they come from the same mantra. And Kleem is the mantra of attraction. It is the mantra of attraction. So let's break down the syllables in Kleem. The K is for Kam. And Gum is the vibration of passion, excitement, right? Because part of what it means to be attractive and to attract is that you are passionate, you are exciting. And also, isn't Gum the mantra of goddess Kamakya? Yes, goddess Kamakya is also she is the goddess of desire. But yes, goddess Kamakya is also, her mantra is also Kama or something, isn't it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Anyway, can't find it right now. Can't think of where to find it, but yes. She is the embodiment, considered to be the embodiment of Kama desire. But anyway, maybe we could also add goddess Kamakya here, just for like right now. So, breaking down vowels, Kam is for like the passion and things like that. And then we have the L, which is Lam, which is again the earth element, but it is also the element that makes things stable. And it's also the earth element Lam, the earth mantra Lam is also related to magnetism. It's related to magnets, You know what I mean? And so we have Kam, which is desire, and then Lam, which is magnets. And so you are magnetizing yourself to your desire. You're pulling yourself to your object of desire, or you are making yourself an object of desire, because the earth is passive. Earth is passive to the heavens, and the reason why I say the heavens is because there are many spiritual worlds. There are many celestial worlds above us. So, for example, let's look at the Kabbalistic way of translating this. The Hindus also have their own way, right? But in any case, so we have here Malkuth, which is the earth, the earthly plane. But now look at how many planes are above the earthly plane. We have 1, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4, we have 5, we have 6, we have 7, we have 8, we have 9, you see. And so the reason why I say the heavens is because from the perspective of a human being, all of these things are basically the same thing. You know, the average person considers only 2 realities, the material and the spiritual. That's it. The average human being only sees the material and the spiritual, and they can't even, and to them, they don't really believe in multiple spiritual worlds. They only believe in one spiritual world. They don't realize that there is the astral plane, Yesod, which is the plane where we go when we dream. They don't realize that there is the celestial plane, which is the plane of angels. And it is said that human perception does not naturally penetrate this plane. They don't realize that there's a divine plane, which is the plane of Brahman, for example, you know, etc., etc., etc. Where were we? Oh, yes. And so the earthly plane is the plane that magnetizes all of these, because all of these celestial planes are pulled by the earth. They want to fall down into the earth. They're magnetized by the earth. And so Lam is very magnetizing, and it helps you to come closer to the thing that you desire. And then the Eames are, of course, the Shakti mantras. They are the dancing mantras. Anyway, let us go back. Where are we? You wonder where Robert Greene's Saturn is placed. Let's see Robert Greene. Robert Greene does not have a birth time. If I remember correctly, Robert Greene does not have a birth time. Oh, there are 2 Robert Greenes I see here. Nope, Robert Greene does not have a birth time. Robert Greene does not have a birth time. He doesn't. Anyway. Oh, oof. Talia says that she has Saturn in Revati, I'm assuming also in the 5th house, and she says that she does not relate to not being original. All right, Talia. Coolio. Okay. Vanessa Van Edwards. Who is she? Vanessa Van Edwards. Oh, this lady. But does she have... Okay, let's see if she has a birth time. Oh, she does not have a birth time. So I don't know where you saw that she has Saturn in the fifth. I don't know where you saw that she has Saturn in the fifth. But yes, I know her. And yes, I also think of her when I think of Saturn in the fifth house. But let's see other things that could possibly relate to this. Okay, okay. Off the top of my head, I can't say anything else. She has Moon conjunct Mercury, but that's not enough. All right then. Leah Shi, I think she also has Saturn in the fifth. She says that she taught herself everything, and she hates those dating videos though because people aren't always honest about gender and romance, what is attractive or erotic. It's largely intuitive. Ooh. Hi Lola, and thank you. It can make you shy. No, Shreem is for, yes, physical beauty. Let's use the words physical beauty. Whereas Gleam is more for attractiveness. Beauty and attractiveness, they're related, but they're different. Oh, I think somebody sent a super chat. I don't know who this person is. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, this was so generous and so kind. JD7287. Thank you very much. It was not necessary, but you are very generous. I'm very appreciative of that. That's very, very kind. So now where are we? Okay, Galactic Blueprint says, should Shreem or Cleam can be a remedy for Saturn in the fifth for sexual dimorphism? For sexual dimorphism, Cleam, because if a man chants Cleam, it makes him more masculine. If a woman chants Cleam, it makes her more feminine. Shreem is generally speaking a feminizing mantra because it is a mantra of the moon. And so men can also chant Shreem and it's going to make them more attractive, but it's going to make them more attractive in a little bit more of a feminine way. No, who says that you can't have an OnlyFans with Saturn in the fifth? If you have Saturn in the fifth, you can eventually be the best when it comes to flirtation, the best when it comes to romance, the best when it comes to seduction and things like that. You start off, remember, Saturn is a planet that starts off ignorant. You start off ignorant, but you can graduate into a deep knowledge, a deep understanding. One of the names of Saturn, I forgot, but one of the names of Saturn says that Saturn is the nature of both ignorance and knowledge. Like literally one of the names of Saturn is, I am both ignorance and I am also knowledge. So if you have Saturn in the fifth, all of the significations of the fifth house that you do not have earlier in life, you could have them in great abundance later on because you literally make a science out of it. So don't think that you can't have an OnlyFans. If you want to have an OnlyFans, you can. Don't worry about that. Oh, that's very sad to hear, Unicorn. Very sad. Mm. High finest. Different people have different opinions about that. I personally, me, myself, and the people that I study, there are not serious dangers, but you just have to keep notes about the changes that happen to you in your life with the mantras that you chant. And some mantras are better recommended not for certain people. So now let us go back. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? No, we were just here. All right, so more negative significations of having Saturn in the fifth. But remember, Saturn is also the planet of opposites, so this could change with time. So, to use a very aggressive term, in the most negative expression of this position, a man with Saturn in the fifth house could be perceived as this word right here that I'm not going to be pronouncing out loud. Because since he does not know how to demonstrate passion for the one he loves, he may struggle to hold on to the one he loves, and she may escape from his hands into the hands of another. Saturn here suggests that one's partner may be easily taken away from one, because Saturn is a planet of loss and is also called the one whose nature is the place of separation. So wherever Saturn sits, because where Saturn sits, it separates one from the significations of that house. So one may be susceptible to having one's partner stolen from one constantly, and may suffer from insecurities related to one's relationship and feel the need to control one's partner, and also suffer from a lot of jealousy. Moving on. The fourth house relates to our ability to receive love. Okay? The fourth house, let's not get it twisted. The fourth house relates to our ability to receive love, but the fifth house is our ability to give love. Since Saturn may so strongly negates, that's what I meant to say. Since Saturn may so strongly negate the significations of the house it sits in to the point of inverting its significations, Saturn here could make a person very self-concerned to the point of self-centeredness. So are you understanding this? Instead of giving love to others, which is the function of the fifth house, one may preserve love for oneself. One may become romantically suspicious, and for this reason, one may also fall into the mentality of the red pill, if you will. If one is a man, or one may fall into the mentality of a red pill if one is a man, or the alternative if one is a woman. One may develop ideas of never giving too much to one's partner for fear of being taken advantage of, or one may develop various strategies to dismantle and disempower the opposite sex, like teach oneself manipulative strategies to control and dominate the partner. One may also learn tricks to take advantage of one's partner. One may be interested in cultivating one's own gender performance, becoming more masculine or more feminine, but as a means of better influencing the opposite sex to extract advantages. The fifth house is also a house of devotion and worship, but some invest their devotion in God, whereas others do so into the lover, because again, the fifth house is where we give love, devotion is an expression of love, and so the fifth house is also has a lot to do with worship. The fourth house has a lot to do with temples and churches, and we receive love like that, and also has to do with our mother, which is the first person that gives us love. But the fifth house has to do with us giving love to others, which is why it also relates to our children, because we give love to our children. It also relates to our deity, because we also give love to our deity. Anyway, moving on. But again, Saturn here can cause such a fear and insecurity and self-centeredness that it may refuse to worship the lover and instead try to find situations where one is oneself worshipped by the lover. One can think of such characters as the Wizard Liz or Shira 7 or various red pill content creators. So are you understanding this? Saturn, where it sits, it basically can so deeply negate the significations of the house that it can invert it. So for example, instead of you being the person who gives love to others, if you have Saturn in the fifth house, you don't want to give love to other people because you're suspicious of other people. You're fearful. You're paranoid. Instead, you want other people to give love to you. And so it can make a person very self-centered. Saturn in the fifth can make a person very self-centered. And it can give rise to such individuals as, once again, we were just talking here, people like Wizard Liz. I don't even know what video to play of hers. But basically, for those of you who don't know about the Wizard Liz, she promotes these type of... How do I even explain this? She basically tries to teach women to be narcissistic, She teaches women not to give too much of themselves to their boyfriends or to their husbands and to always demand more, right? And she also teaches people to get into situations where the man loves her 10 times more than she loves the man. And also the red pill people do the exact same thing. Here I was watching like this like 2 hour debate podcast or whatever. I just wanted to hear what they were talking about. And many of these red pillars also do the same thing. You know, their fifth house does not operate freely and does not operate the way it ought to operate. And so it's as if they have malefics there. So now where are we? Yes, it's okay to do these mantras if you already have a strong fifth house. Black pilled is looks based. Okay, interesting. You're do not call yourself that. I'm not going to say that word. Do not call yourself that. But yes, Saturn the fifth can also create that. We discussed that. It is not a doomed placement. It just starts off doomed. Wait, isn't Placidus already whole signs? Um, but in any case, if you have an Earth ascendant, you're gonna have an Earth fifth house, and so if you have, so yeah, that's what I do. If you have a fire ascendant, you have a fire fifth house. If you're an Aries ascendant, then necessarily Leo is your fifth house. If you're a Taurus ascendant, then necessarily Virgo is your fifth house. That is the house system that I use. Yes, exactly. You're only doomed if you give up. That's where Saturn dooms you. Oh, Shira 7 says that? Thank you, Andrea. Andrea is here saying that Shira 7 literally says that her advice is not for people who are looking for love, and she advises women to go for the unattractive men so that they won't get left. Very much Saturn in the fifth house. Oh, she says that. I mean, listen, I like the fact that she says that. You know why? Because at least it's self-aware, and at least she's like letting people know, hey, this is not for people who want to get love. This is for people who want X, Y, and Z instead. Instead, all these other people, I'm not sure if they're honest like that. Hi, Billy. And yes, it would negatively affect creativity, at least in the beginning of one's life. Galactic Blueprint, these people are late bloomers in all the things related to the fifth house. So they're late bloomers when it comes to dating, for example. That's how they're late bloomers. Andy Warhol's ascendant was Cancer, and his fifth house was Scorpio. Okay, so now let us continue. So here I go back to saying that remember that Saturn is a scientific planet, and since it relates to understanding this and how they function in the most basic and practical way possible, in the house of romance and dating, it will try to reduce these significations into a science as much as possible. At its best, it can end up with a lot of true and valuable statistical knowledge, psychological knowledge, and eventually even spiritual knowledge related to love and dating. And at its worst, it could end up in a dating podcast. So Saturn at its best can turn the fifth house into a science and give a person deep understanding of the nature of romance, the nature of charm, the nature of seduction. But at its worst, you could simply end up as a red pillar and a dating podcast. So yeah. Anyway, so now moving on to children. Moving on to children, let's discuss this. One may have One may overly shelter one's children. One may be overprotective of them and even become a helicopter parent of sorts. It is as if one wishes to keep their children in a sort of bubble simulation, in a sort of bubble. One would wish to isolate their child from the horrors of the real world to such an extent that one may stunt one's children's growth. One would trap one's children in a simulation of reality that doesn't exist, and in turn, this may spoil one's children and keep them unprepared to face the real world. As a parent, this individual may be strict and, in the extremes, not allow their child to leave the home or to have too many friends or to go to sleepovers. As a parent, one can be viewed by one's children as an oppressive force and as one that is too strict. One's children may grow up overly dependent on one's parents, not being able to perform even the most basic tasks expected of a person their age. This is because the person who has Saturn in the fifth house, as the parent, they're always going to limit their children, and their children basically grow up stunted, and they don't know how to do many basic things for themselves. Moving on, one's children could take longer to drive, for example. One's children could simply take longer to develop in general. So remember that Saturn is also the planet of fear, anxiety, and paranoia, and wherever it sits, it creates those emotions. And so if you have Saturn in the fifth house, you could have a lot of fears related to your children, a lot of paranoias related to your children, a lot of insecurities related to your children. And because of that, you may be overly protective of them. You may shield them and shield them, and shield them so much that you deprive them of literally growing up. You know what I mean? And then they end up 30 years old, not understanding many basic things about how to take care of themselves. They could end up 30 years old without knowing how to cook, for example. They could end up 30 years old, again, not knowing how to drive, not knowing how to do many basic things. Moving on. One could, at worst, have spoiled and bratty children who are never satisfied. Because Saturn is a planet that is never satisfied. Alternatively, one could have deeply rebellious children because they would deeply desire to escape the grasp of you, the very strict parent. And so one's children could also be rule-breaking and disorderly. Naturally, because since you're trapping them at home and trapping them in a bubble, it could provoke within that child the desire to rebel. But at the best, one could have children that are obedient, humble, and very disciplined. Nevertheless, Saturn influencing this house may create an individual uninterested in having children altogether. Back to the chat. Where are we? Yes, the Cream mantra would help, but Cream is one of the more dangerous mantras. If you chant the Cream mantra wherever it is that you're having difficulty with Saturn, Cream will destroy Saturn's boundaries. But having Saturn's boundaries destroyed is not necessarily a good thing. They could struggle to be an artist initially, remember, but with effort, they could become one of the best artists. That's what Saturn does. Saturn takes you from the absolute worst, and through effort, it can make you the absolute best. But the thing is that the average person does not have the discipline to really, really, really work with Saturn and turn it into the best thing. And so a lot of people, wherever it is they have Saturn, they just end up mediocre in that place, you know. Oh, Mother Teresa had Saturn in the fifth. Okay, that's interesting. They have Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, blessed. They do have different personalities. They should have different personalities. They're different houses. The houses change. The fourth house is the house of one's mother, but the fifth house is the house of one's children. Lola Kova, you're saying that your parents overly sheltered you, but do your parents have Saturn in the fifth? Oh, wow. Galactic Blueprint is saying that my dad had Saturn in the fifth, and my mom Mars in the fifth, and me Saturn in the fifth. I cannot drive and was overly sheltered. Interesting, interesting. But let me ask you something, Galactic. You're saying that your dad had Saturn in the fifth. So do you feel like your dad was probably more to blame for that? And since your mom had Mars in the fifth, didn't your mom try to encourage you to be more free? Like, I'm curious, what was the dynamic between them? Who tried more to do what exactly? Or were they both the same? I don't know. Uh, Miguel's, yes, you're right. I keep forgetting to write. I forgot to write in my document the many ways in which everything that I was saying was also related to Saturn's third aspect to the seventh house. Because many of the things that I was saying about dating also have a lot to do with Saturn's third aspects onto the seventh house. So, yeah. An exalted Saturn would bring out the best of displacements. And since Saturn would be well placed, Saturn would still demand some work from you as the individual, but Saturn would reward you more quickly. The more difficult your Saturn, the harder it is to work with that Saturn, because that Saturn would require a lot of effort from you, and then it will reward you with very little. But if your Saturn is happy and well placed, it's still going to give you work, but it's going to reward you quickly and it's going to reward you greatly. So yeah. Dyslexia and Saturn in the fifth. I don't understand too much about dyslexia. Isn't it the inability to read or something like that? No, that's more of like a Saturn in the second type of thing. Leah She is saying that her daughters will be spoiled and bratty, and her sons will be in boot camp. Oh my goodness! Both things are significations of Saturn in the fifth. Opposite things, but both have a lot to do with. The one has a lot to do with imposing strict restrictions, and the other has to do with putting your child in a bubble. But both of them related to Saturn in the fifth. Oh, lol. Okay, so Galactic Blueprint is telling me now that her dad tried and instilled fear in her about going out driving, even going out to study for uni or having fun with friends. But her mom didn't bother much about that. She was just aggressive. Saturn in Taurus should be very good, actually. Retrograde means the planet is brighter, and usually planets, when they're brighter, they're happier. But yeah. So, moving on, where are we now? The fifth house is also a wish granting house, since, for example, our children represent our wishes. And Saturn here could possess the power of granting other people's wishes. This goes back to the story in the Puranas of Saturn, where his penance was so impressive that he invoked all three of the Trimurti together, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, a feat no one else had ever accomplished. And so, one with Saturn the fifth could excel greatly, excuse me, in all spiritual matters, because the fifth house is also where we sacrifice to God, we give to God, and do so devotionally. Saturn here can seduce and persuade even the most difficult deities and make them do one's bidding. So Saturn here can make the granting of everyday wishes more difficult in time, So Saturn in the fifth house can make the granting of everyday wishes more difficult, but in time and with effort, it can gain the ability of granting any wish, no matter how difficult. One of its names is also the bestower of the fruits that are desired in the minds of a multitude of devotees. And so for those of you who do not know the story of the Puranas, you should go read the Navagraha Puranas. I think I showed that book once here. Yeah, the fifth house is a house that has a lot to do. We don't often talk about the spiritual side of the fifth house, but since the fifth house has a lot to do with devotion and giving to God and gratifying God, because listen, part of what it means to be a spiritual person is also knowing how to seduce the gods. That is what you do. The Bible teaches you how to seduce God because God needs to be approached a particular way. And remember that it is said of the church that the church is the bride of Christ. A lot of people do not like to explore the more sensual, sexual, erotic aspects of a lot of religions. But yeah, that is true. Actually, one of the reasons why we cover ourselves, we cover our bodies, is because only God can see our body. You know what I mean? Yes, there's a sensual aspect when it comes to religion as well. And when you understand that, it can also help you grow spiritually. And so the fifth house is also has a lot to do with us seducing God. It has a lot to do with prayers, rituals, meditations, things like that. And so Saturn here, Saturn, which is already a planet of renunciation, Saturn, which is already a planet of penance and sacrifices. Of all the planets, it can eventually become the one that is the best at seducing a deity. And Saturn in the fifth house can actually bless an individual with the ability of granting any one of its most difficult wishes. Any one of its most difficult wishes, Saturn in the fifth house can help you do that. Let me go on here. This part, let me take this part out. So to reiterate, one excels in meditation, prayer, and general sacrifices. Saturn in the fifth house in general is less about romantic love and more devotion to God, because Saturn here wishes to understand the roots of true passion and the roots of true love and the roots of true devotion, which is ultimately devotion to the Lord. And so this is the end of the document here on YouTube, but I will be adding a little bit more for Patreon. Now let me go back to the chat to see any more questions or comments or anything like that. I mean, the Bible is not going to come out of its neck and say, I'm going to teach you how to seduce God. But like, it's the way that it's something about the language. I mean, remember that the earth and the earthly plane is the bride of the celestial planes. There's a marriage between them. You know what I mean? There's a marriage between them. And so when you read various religious texts, you get that feel. And a lot of people come to this understanding. Like, for example, what is her name? She was some saint from the past. This is her book. Teresa of Avila, something like that. Yes, a lot of saints, a lot of nuns. How am I going to articulate this thought right now? Because part of the idea behind many saints and many nuns and things like that is that they're virgins to common man, but the only man that can penetrate them is God. The light of God is the only one that can penetrate them. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. Maybe one day we can have that conversation. Maybe one day we can have that conversation more deeply. Oh, this chat is moving too quickly now. Yes, Galactic. Somebody with Sun in the fifth can be effortlessly charismatic. Do I have any advice for displacements? I mean, it depends what specific problem is plaguing you, but are you talking like in terms of like mantras and things like that? You know, the mantras that are healing for Saturn are some of the more dangerous ones. You know, dangerous because since Saturn is a planet of boundaries, when you dissolve those boundaries, you do not know what you're opening yourself up to. You know what I mean? And so these mantras that are related to Saturn, a lot of times what people say, what people claim is that they can actually kill you because you're destroying these boundaries that you do not know to what extent they're protecting you. So what specifically about displacement would you like to heal? Because anything to do with like charisma and things like that, you have to make a practice out of it. You have to make a science out of it. You know. Hi, Billy. What made me want to start the Saturn series? Honestly speaking, it was random. I don't even know what inspired me. Just one day I decided, oh, let me just make a Saturn in the first house video. And then after a while, I was like, let me make a Saturn in the second. And then it just ended up like this. But thank you so much. I really appreciate your appreciation. I appreciate your appreciation. Sam Witch, where is your Saturn? Here you are saying that you wanted to be a nun as a kid, etc. The best signs for Saturn are its friends. Saturn is friends with Mercury and Venus, and so those are the best signs, and also Saturn's own signs. Thank you so much, Venus158. I really appreciate your appreciation. I appreciate your appreciation. So, guys, do we end the stream? Do we end the stream? Any more comments? Any more questions? Oh, shyness is your problem, Galactic Blueprint. Shyness is your problem. I see, I see, I see. Hi, Andrea. You're still upset about the Saturn in the first half video. I will say though, I do love you guys' excitement. It's very touching. Miguel, Saturn in the fifth aspects also the 11th house, and so not having the ability to be charming or conversational or playful can affect one's ability to make powerful friends and to expand one's network. So Saturn's aspect in the 11 causes that, and then Saturn aspects the second house from his 10th, and so see, here's the thing: in order to prove that you understood a concept, you have to come up with your own unique ideas and your own unique insights into a concept. Because if you're simply repeating other people's ideas, that's not proof of understanding. You know what I mean? And so how very interesting that The second house of knowledge is also restricted by Saturn when Saturn's sitting in the fifth, because your own ideas add to your own knowledge. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Um, Saturn in the fifth is not related to the tense, so I don't understand that. JD says that she has a friend who has Saturn the fifth who was an early bloomer in dating. I have a question, JD. JD7287. Where was your friends' Mars? I want to know where your friends' Mars and Sun was. And also, what is the condition of their Saturn? No, Galactic. Watching Red Pill stuff is not going to help you with shyness. You know something, Galactic? As a general rule, the Cream Mantra is recommended for Saturn issues, but the Cream Mantra has the power of Mars because it's Mars's mantra. And Mars is a planet that dares to do things. And so you could chant the Cream Mantra, which could come with unknown consequences. You can do that as long as you have a notebook and you keep notes about the consequences. Or what you could do, Galactic, is you could be daring. Be daring in all the things related to the fifth house. One day, spark up a conversation with a stranger. Don't be afraid of being awkward. One day, try to flirt with somebody. You're going to embarrass yourself, but don't be afraid of that. Saturn is also the planet of embarrassment, and so where it sits is going to make you so fearful of the significations of that house that you don't even try to do anything. And because you don't try to do anything, you remain underdeveloped. The people that can develop their Saturn the best are the people that dare. The people that try, they fall, they are awkward and they're embarrassing, but with time they improve. To such an extent that the memory of them having been embarrassing or humiliating or awkward is long forgotten. No, Saturn in Rohini is not malefic. It is not because it's in Taurus. JD, okay. So JD's telling me that this friend that had Saturn in the fifth house, but who had romantic experiences very quickly in life, also had Mars conjunct Ketu debilitated and had Venus conjunct Sun. So that helps us understand why it is that they were very advanced. Because the energy of Mars, see, let me try to explain this. Saturn and Mars have opposite energies. Saturn slows things down, Mars speeds things up. Saturn is still and frozen, but Mars is hot and always moving. And so here's the thing. Whereas Saturn, when it's in a house, it takes you longer to discover the things of that house. When Mars is in a house, you become very, very fast at discovering the things that are related to that house. And if Mars overall is more prominent in your charts, Mars will overpower Saturn and will release the significations of that Saturn more quickly. But if the opposite of true, if Saturn is more powerful in a chart, Saturn is going to freeze everything. So if your friend has Mars debilitated conjunct Ketu in the fourth house, which is a Kendra house, I don't know the conditions of everything else in your friend's chart, but that person's Mars could possibly be more prominent in his chart overall, that person's Mars, which would overpower his Saturn, which would force Saturn to release some of its energy. It would heat Saturn up and force Saturn to relax its boundaries. Do you see what I mean? And so whereas Saturn in whatever house it sits in would usually take longer because Mars overall is dominating, it's going to release those things more and more quickly. But like I said, JD, I don't know the rest about your friend's chart, so can't say much about that. Hi, Andrea. Yes, Saturn's aspect to the seventh house, no matter what house it's in, is going to have the same effects. Leah Shi, any predictions for Saturn return events for Saturn in the fifth house? Is it the first Saturn return? If it is the first Saturn return, somebody has Saturn in the fifth house, whereas previously they did not have a lot of romantic opportunities. Now that Saturn is coming to its return, they may have the opportunity to have an explosion of romantic opportunities. It might happen. But see, here's the thing about Saturn returns. Saturn returns can only benefit you if while you were under Saturn, you were doing something. That's the thing. So sorry to hear that, Na 6495. I understand that. If your Saturn return is coming, Na 6495, and you have Saturn in the fifth house, then yes, Saturn could finally release. One day we'll have a conversation about Saturn returns. I want to have a live stream about Saturn returns so I can share my 1 or 2 cents. So yeah, so you guys can understand that. And also a few basic interpretations. Mars in the first has a lot more power than Saturn in the fifth, Sandwich. A lot more power. A lot more power. Hi, Blessed. You know something, Blessed? I'm actually releasing my readings today. And so starting from today, I'm opening my readings. I'm going to make a post about that. All right, listen. I think this is the end. This is the end. This has been a very, very good stream. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I thank you guys all so much for participating. See you in the next one.